Standing on the sidewalk watching movers toss my belongings into cardboard boxes felt like watching my life crumble in real time. My younger sister Amber stood on the front porch of my house directing the workers with theatrical hand gestures, while her unemployed husband lounged in my favorite chair. My parents had given me 48 hours to vacate the 4-bedroom colonial I purchased 2 years ago so they could accommodate Amber's growing family. The irony burned deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. I bought this house specifically so my aging parents could live rent-free during their retirement years, sacrificing my own dreams and financial security for their comfort. Now they were choosing my irresponsible sister over their devoted son, who had given up everything for their well-being. The betrayal hit harder because I knew this house represented more than property or money. It symbolized every sacrifice I had made, every extra shift I worked, every personal relationship I destroyed to provide for the people who were now casting me aside. As another box of my possessions crashed onto the concrete, I realized my family had been planning this moment for months, while I remained blindly loyal to people who saw my devotion as weakness rather than love. 18 months earlier, I was living in a cramped apartment downtown while working double shifts as a software engineer at TechFlow Solutions and taking freelance web development projects every weekend. My bank account showed a pathetic balance of $3,000, but I had a mission that consumed every waking moment. My parents were struggling in their tiny rental house, where my father's arthritis made climbing stairs agony, and my mother needed constant assistance after her hip replacement surgery. The landlord kept raising rent and threatening eviction notices that arrived with frightening regularity. I remember the exact moment I decided to change everything. Dad was sitting in his worn recliner, wincing as he tried to stand, while Mom struggled to reach items in the kitchen cabinets. Their monthly Social Security checks barely covered basic expenses, and their medical bills created a mountain of debt that grew larger every month. That evening, I made a promise that would ultimately destroy my life, while I believed I was saving theirs. Working 90-hour weeks became my new normal. I survived on energy drinks and 3 hours of sleep coding until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. Every spare dollar went into my house fund while I lived on ramen noodles and store-brand peanut butter. My girlfriend Sarah begged me to slow down, warning that I was destroying my health and our relationship. When my dream job offer arrived from Seattle with a salary that would have doubled my income, I turned it down, because moving would mean abandoning my parents. Sarah gave me an ultimatum the night I rejected the Seattle opportunity. She wanted a partner who prioritized our future together instead of sacrificing everything for parents who expected their children to solve their problems. Our breakup felt inevitable, but it still shattered something inside me. I convinced myself the sacrifice was worth it, because family comes first, and someday my parents would appreciate what I had given up for them. Finding the perfect house took 6 months of searching every weekend. The 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street had everything my parents needed. A master bedroom on the ground floor, wide doorways for potential wheelchair access, a bathroom with grab bars already installed, and a wraparound porch where they could sit comfortably. The asking price of $230,000 stretched my budget beyond reasonable limits, but I worked additional freelance contracts and sold everything valuable I owned to secure the down payment. The day we closed on the house, my parents cried with gratitude. Dad kept shaking my hand and repeating how proud he was to have raised such a dedicated son. Mom hugged me so tightly I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. Moving them into the spacious master bedroom felt like the greatest accomplishment of my life. They had their own bathroom, a sitting area with large windows, and enough space for all their medical equipment. I paid all utilities, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs while they lived completely free from financial worries. For nearly 2 years, our arrangement worked beautifully. My parents thrived in their comfortable environment, their health improved, and I felt proud knowing my sacrifice had genuine meaning. I worked constantly to maintain the mortgage payments and household expenses, but seeing them happy made every exhausting day worthwhile. They bragged to their friends about their successful son who bought them a beautiful home, and I basked in their appreciation. Everything changed 6 months ago when Amber lost her apartment. My 26-year-old sister had never held a job for longer than 3 months and lived with her boyfriend Derek, a charming manipulator who spent most days playing video games while collecting unemployment benefits. When their landlord finally evicted them for 6 months of unpaid rent, Amber arrived at our house crying and pregnant, begging for temporary shelter. My parents immediately insisted I allow Amber and Derek to move into one of the spare bedrooms. Against every instinct screaming danger, I agreed because Amber was carrying their first grandchild. I established clear boundaries. They could stay for 3 months maximum while finding jobs and their own apartment. Derek promised to start job hunting immediately, and Amber swore they would respect my house and my generosity. The agreement lasted exactly 2 weeks before Derek began treating my home like his personal entertainment center. He invited friends over for loud parties that lasted until dawn, left garbage throughout the house, and consumed my groceries without replacement or permission. When I confronted him about finding employment, he laughed and said real jobs were for suckers who lacked entrepreneurial vision. Amber defended every inappropriate behavior and accused me of jealousy because they were starting a family while I remained alone. My parents consistently sided with Amber during every conflict. When I complained about Derek's friends smoking marijuana in my living room, Mom said I was being unreasonable because pregnant women needed emotional support. When Derek broke my expensive coffee table during a wrestling match with his buddies, Dad suggested I was too uptight about material possessions. Every boundary I established was undermined by my parents, who treated Amber like a delicate princess while dismissing my legitimate concerns as selfishness. The final destruction began 3 weeks ago when I traveled to Chicago for a mandatory business conference. My parents called the morning after I left, claiming they needed to update their estate planning documents and wanted me to sign some papers when I returned. They said their attorney would handle everything and I should not worry about legal details since they trusted him completely. I returned home to find an envelope from Morrison and Associates law firm containing copies of documents I had allegedly signed. According to the papers, I had voluntarily transferred partial ownership of my house to Amber, recognizing her need for stability as an expectant mother. The signature looked remarkably similar to mine, but I had never seen these documents before receiving the copies. When I confronted my parents, they claimed they had every right to make this decision because they lived in the house and contributed to the family. Dad said Amber needed security for her baby while I was young enough to start over somewhere else. Mom accused me of being selfish for questioning their choice to help their pregnant daughter. The betrayal felt like a physical blow that knocked the breath from my lungs. Their attorney had apparently convinced them that since they lived in the house and I was absent frequently for work, travel, Amber had stronger legal grounds for ownership than their son, who merely paid the bills. They signed affidavits claiming I had abandoned the property and neglected my filial duties while Amber needed stable housing for her child. The legal documents transformed my home into a battleground where my own family was fighting against me. The studio apartment I rented downtown felt like a prison cell after living in my spacious house. 400 square feet of cramped space with paper-thin walls and a kitchenette barely large enough for a microwave became my new reality. My neighbors included a rotating cast of college students who played music until 3 in the morning, and a woman next door whose boyfriend visited for screaming arguments that lasted for hours. The contrast between this temporary shelter and the beautiful home I provided for my ungrateful family created a constant ache in my chest. Sleep became impossible as my mind replayed every conversation, every sacrifice, every moment of misplaced trust that led to this disaster. I had given up my dream job, ended my relationship with Sarah, and worked myself into exhaustion to provide security for people who repaid my devotion with calculated betrayal. The legal documents felt like a dagger twisted in my back by the people who should have protected me above everyone else. During my first week in the studio apartment, I called Morrison and Associates to schedule an appointment with the attorney who handled my parents' documents. The receptionist informed me that Mr. Morrison was unavailable for consultations with non-clients, and my parents had specifically requested that I not be included in their legal matters. The dismissal felt like another slap in the face, confirming that my family had been planning this betrayal for months, while I remained completely oblivious. I hired my own attorney, Jonathan Harper, who specialized in real estate fraud and elder law. After reviewing the documents, he immediately identified several irregularities that suggested forgery, but warned that proving fraud would require extensive investigation and potentially months of litigation. Meanwhile, Amber was establishing deeper roots in my house, while I lived in exile, unable to stop the ongoing destruction of my property and my life. My attempts to visit the house for additional belongings met with hostility and resistance. Derek had installed new locks and claimed I was trespassing on property that no longer belonged to me. When I used my original key to enter through the back door, I found the interior transformed beyond recognition. My home office had been converted into a nursery with expensive furniture that must have cost thousands of dollars. Derek and his friends had claimed the basement as their entertainment area, installing a large television and gaming equipment that definitely exceeded their financial means. Amber had moved into the master bedroom, displacing our parents to the smaller guest room down the hallway. The irony was devastating. I bought this house specifically so my parents could enjoy the comfort of the master suite, but my pregnant sister had priority over their needs. When I asked Dad about the bedroom situation, he sheepishly explained that Amber needed more space for the baby, and they were happy to accommodate her requirements. The most painful discovery occurred when I noticed valuable items missing throughout the house. My grandmother's antique jewelry collection, which had been displayed in the dining room china cabinet, was nowhere to be found. Dad's vintage watch collection from his years as a railroad engineer had vanished from his dresser. The expensive electronics I had purchased for the family entertainment center were gone, replaced by older, cheaper alternatives that barely functioned. When I confronted my parents about the missing items, they became defensive and evasive. Mom claimed they had moved valuable belongings to a safer location because Derek's friends made them nervous. Dad suggested I was imagining things because stress was affecting my memory. Their explanations felt hollow and unconvincing, particularly when they refused to provide specific details about where these precious family heirlooms were being stored for safekeeping. Amber's response was even more troubling. She accused me of being paranoid and controlling, suggesting that my obsession with material possessions revealed my true character. According to her twisted logic, I cared more about jewelry and watches than my family's happiness and security. Derek smirked during her emotional performance, clearly enjoying the conflict that was tearing our family apart. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who lived next door, knocked on my studio apartment door carrying a manila folder filled with printouts. She explained that her granddaughter had been helping her browse Facebook Marketplace for furniture deals when they discovered several familiar items being sold by someone named Amber Collins. The listings included photographs of my grandmother's jewelry, Dad's watches, and other valuable belongings from my house. Mrs. Patterson had screenshot each listing before they disappeared from the marketplace. The evidence was overwhelming. Amber was systematically selling family heirlooms and claiming they were gifts she had received. Her descriptions mentioned sentimental value and family connections, but she was converting irreplaceable memories into quick cash for her personal benefit. The jewelry alone was worth more than $10,000, and Dad's railroad watches were collector items with significant historical value. Armed with this evidence, I returned to the house for a confrontation that would either restore some semblance of justice or completely destroy what remained of our family relationships. Amber was home alone when I arrived, Derek having disappeared on one of his mysterious errands that seemed to occur whenever difficult conversations were necessary. She was sitting in the living room surrounded by baby catalogs and decorating magazines, planning her perfect nursery with money stolen from our family's heritage. I placed the printed screenshots on the coffee table and watched her face transform from surprise to anger to desperate calculation. She tried several different explanations. The jewelry was gifts from our grandmother before she died. The watches belonged to Derek's grandfather, and the electronics were purchases they had made independently. Each lie became more elaborate and less believable as she realized the evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss or explain away. The truth finally emerged when Amber broke down and admitted she was selling family belongings to pay for baby expenses and Derek's various debts. According to her justification, I had abandoned the family and forfeited any claim to these items when I moved out. She believed she deserved compensation for the emotional trauma I was causing by fighting their rightful ownership of the house. In her distorted worldview, stealing family heirlooms was acceptable, because I was the villain who refused to accept their entitlement to my property and my life's work. The conversation escalated when Derek returned home and found us arguing in his claimed territory. He immediately became aggressive and threatening, demanding that I leave his house before he called the police for trespassing. When I mentioned the evidence of theft, he laughed and said proving anything would be my word against theirs. His confidence suggested this was not his first experience with manipulating vulnerable families and exploiting their trust for financial gain. I left the house with more questions than answers, but also with proof that my sister was a thief, and my parents were either willfully ignorant or actively complicit in the destruction of our family's legacy. The missing heirlooms represented more than monetary value. They were tangible connections to our heritage and our grandmother's love that Amber was selling to support her irresponsible lifestyle. This betrayal cut deeper than the forged documents because it revealed the extent of her selfishness and the depth of my parents' favoritism. That evening, I sat in my cramped apartment, reviewing the evidence and planning my next steps. The screenshots would be valuable in legal proceedings, but I also needed to understand the full scope of Derek's influence and manipulation. My family had never been perfect, but they had never been deliberately cruel or criminal before Derek entered our lives. His arrival coincided with every destructive change that had torn apart our relationships and stolen my security. I was beginning to realize that this conflict was bigger than sibling rivalry or parental favoritism. Derek was orchestrating a comprehensive scheme to steal my house and destroy my family relationships, while using Amber's pregnancy as emotional leverage to prevent resistance. My parents were victims of his manipulation, but they were also willing participants who chose to believe his lies because they supported their preference for Amber over their devoted son. The battle for my house was becoming a battle for my family's soul, and I was fighting alone against people who had turned my love into a weapon against me. But the evidence was mounting, and I was beginning to understand that Derek's criminal behavior extended far beyond simple theft. His confidence and experience suggested this was a practice scheme, which meant he had probably victimized other families before targeting mine. Attorney Jonathan Harper's office occupied the 14th floor of a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. His walls displayed law degrees from Harvard and numerous awards for excellence in real estate fraud cases, giving me confidence that I had found someone capable of fighting Derek's sophisticated manipulation. During our second meeting, Harper spread the evidence across his mahogany conference table and explained the complex legal challenges we faced. The forged signature was provable through handwriting analysis, but Derek had been clever about creating plausible justifications for the property transfer. My parents had signed sworn affidavits claiming I had agreed to the arrangement verbally and that my signature was obtained with my full knowledge and consent. Their statements created reasonable doubt about the fraud, particularly since they were willing to testify against their own son to support their preferred daughter. Harper explained that real estate fraud cases often took 18 to 24 months to resolve through the court system. During this time, Amber and Derek would continue living in my house, potentially causing irreversible damage to the property and accumulating legal rights through adverse possession. They could also take out additional loans against the house's equity, creating financial obligations that would follow the property regardless of who ultimately owned it. The investigation deepened when Harper hired a private investigator to research Derek's background and financial history. What we discovered was far more disturbing than simple laziness or irresponsibility. Derek Sullivan had been married twice before both relationships ending with mysterious financial problems and missing assets. His first wife in Michigan filed a police report claiming Derek had stolen her inheritance and disappeared with her family's savings. His second wife in Ohio obtained a restraining order after Derek threatened her when she discovered his gambling addiction and mounting debts. Bank records revealed that Derek owed enormous amounts of money to multiple creditors, including several organizations that were definitely not traditional lending institutions. Credit card companies had been calling constantly, and collection agencies had begun threatening legal action for unpaid debts totaling more than $60,000. Most alarming were the cash advances Derek had taken against high-interest payday loans, creating a spiral of compound debt that suggested desperation and potential danger. Harper's investigator discovered that Derek had attempted to use my house as collateral for a loan application at 3 different banks during my business trip to Chicago. He presented forged documents claiming partial ownership and tried to secure a home equity line of credit for $50,000. 2 banks rejected his application because the paperwork appeared fraudulent, but the third bank was still processing his request and considering approval based on the property's appraised value. The revelation that Derek was actively attempting to mortgage my house without my knowledge or consent added federal fraud charges to our potential legal case. Harper filed emergency motions to prevent any financial transactions involving the property and placed alerts with all major lending institutions to block future loan applications. However, these protective measures could not address the immediate danger of Derek's mounting debts and the type of people who might come looking for repayment. My parents' health began deteriorating under the stress of legal proceedings and family conflict. Dad's arthritis worsened, and his early-stage dementia became more pronounced as he struggled to understand the complex legal situation. Mom developed anxiety symptoms that required medication, and her blood pressure spiked dangerously during particularly heated arguments about the house. Their doctor warned that continued stress could trigger serious cardiac events or accelerate Dad's cognitive decline. The guilt of watching my parents suffer was almost unbearable, but I could not abandon my legal rights or allow Derek to continue his criminal behavior. Every fiber of my being wanted to withdraw the lawsuits and accept their betrayal to restore family peace. But Harper warned that backing down now would embolden Derek to escalate his fraud and potentially target other vulnerable families. My case could prevent future victims from experiencing the same devastation that was destroying my life. Amber's pregnancy became increasingly complicated as her due date approached. The stress of legal proceedings and Derek's mounting financial problems created a high-risk situation that concerned her doctors. She was placed on bed rest during her 7th month, ironically requiring the type of care and support that my parents should have been providing in their comfortable master bedroom. Instead, they were cramped into the smaller guest room, while Derek dominated the house with his criminal associates and their threatening presence. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday evening when 3 men in expensive suits knocked on my house door demanding to speak with Derek about overdue payments. Mrs. Patterson called me immediately when she saw them arguing on the front porch and noticed one man was repeatedly poking Derek in the chest while making threatening gestures. By the time I arrived, Derek had disappeared through the back door, leaving my parents alone to face his creditors. Dad answered the door in his pajamas, confused by his dementia and unaware of the danger these men represented. When they demanded access to Derek's belongings or information about his whereabouts, Dad invited them inside because his deteriorating condition made him unable to recognize threats or protect himself appropriately. Only Mom's frantic phone call to the police prevented what could have become a violent confrontation in my own living room. The police report documented that Derek owed $50,000 to individuals who were not traditional creditors, and that he had been using my house as his permanent address for loan applications and debt obligations. His creditors believed my property was available to satisfy his debts, and they were prepared to use intimidation and potential violence to secure repayment. My parents were now living in a house that had become a target for dangerous criminals because of their golden daughter's poor choice in husbands. When I confronted Amber about Derek's debts and the danger he was creating for our family, she broke down crying and claimed she knew nothing about his financial problems. According to her story, Derek had told her his frequent absences were job interviews and business meetings, not visits with loan sharks and gambling associates. She begged me to help them escape the situation, but also refused to cooperate with legal proceedings that might result in Derek's arrest and prosecution. Harper obtained an emergency restraining order against Derek based on the police report and evidence of his creditors' threats against my parents. However, enforcing the order required Derek to be served with legal papers, and he had essentially vanished after the confrontation with his creditors. Amber claimed she had no idea where he was hiding, but her evasive answers suggested she was still protecting him, despite the danger he was creating for everyone. The house I bought to provide security for my aging parents had become a fortress under siege by criminals demanding payment from a con artist who had manipulated my family's emotions to steal our property. My parents were trapped in a dangerous situation they helped create through their favoritism and poor judgment, while I fought desperately to save them from consequences they refused to acknowledge or accept responsibility for causing. The irony was devastating. Derek's scheme was succeeding beyond his wildest expectations. He had stolen my house, destroyed my family relationships, exploited my parents' vulnerability, and endangered everyone's safety while facing minimal consequences for his actions. Meanwhile, I was spending my life savings on attorney fees to reclaim property I never should have lost while watching my parents suffer, because they chose to trust a criminal over their devoted son who sacrificed everything for their welfare. The emergency restraining order against Derek provided temporary legal protection, but it felt like placing a bandage on a severed artery. Harper explained that restraining orders only work when the subject can be located and served with papers, and Derek had effectively vanished after his creditor's threatening visit. Meanwhile, his debts continued accumulating interest, and the dangerous people seeking repayment knew exactly where to find his pregnant wife and her vulnerable grandparents. I made the difficult decision to temporarily move back into my house to protect my parents, despite the legal complications this created. Harper warned that residing on disputed property could be interpreted as acceptance of the ownership transfer, potentially weakening our fraud case. However, leaving my elderly parents alone with Amber, who was 8 months pregnant and on bed rest, would have been abandoning them to face Derek's creditors without any protection. Mrs. Patterson provided crucial support by agreeing to serve as an emergency contact and witness to any threatening behavior. Her house offered a clear view of my front porch and driveway, making her an ideal surveillance point for monitoring unwanted visitors. We established a system where she would call police immediately if she observed any suspicious activity or unfamiliar vehicles lingering near the property. The first week of my return revealed the full extent of Derek's destructive impact on my house. He had punched holes in walls during angry outbursts, leaving behind damage that would cost thousands of dollars to repair. The basement flooded because Derek had disconnected pipes while installing his entertainment center, creating water damage that threatened the foundation's structural integrity. Every room showed evidence of neglect and abuse that transformed my beautiful home into a deteriorating wreck. Amber's condition deteriorated along with the house's physical state. The stress of Derek's disappearance combined with his mounting debts and threatening creditors triggered premature contractions that required emergency medical intervention. Her doctor prescribed complete bed rest and warned that continued stress could result in dangerous complications for both mother and baby. The irony was not lost on me. I was now caring for the sister who helped steal my house, while she carried the child of a criminal who endangered our entire family. My parents' health declined dramatically under the pressure of their living situation. Dad's dementia symptoms worsened when his familiar routines were disrupted by constant fear and uncertainty. He began having episodes where he forgot about the legal troubles and asked when Derek was coming home for dinner. Mom developed insomnia and anxiety attacks that required prescription medication, but her guilt over the situation made her reluctant to seek adequate medical treatment. The investigation by Harper's private investigator revealed disturbing new information about Derek's criminal activities. He had been using my house's address to apply for multiple credit cards and personal loans, creating a paper trail that suggested I was either complicit in his fraud or criminally negligent in protecting my identity. Collection agencies began calling the house demanding payment from me, personally claiming that Derek had listed me as a co-signer for various debts I had never seen or approved. Identity theft added another layer to the legal nightmare we were fighting. Derek had obtained copies of my Social Security card, driver's license, and financial information from documents my parents had given him access to during his residency. He used this information to open credit accounts and apply for loans in my name, destroying my credit rating while funding his gambling addiction and lifestyle expenses. Repairing the damage to my identity would require years of legal proceedings and constant vigilance to prevent future fraud. The breakthrough came when Harper's investigator traced Derek's cell phone records and discovered a pattern of calls to a casino in Las Vegas, where he had been staying under an assumed name. Cross-referencing hotel records with Derek's known aliases revealed that he had been living in Nevada for 3 weeks, gambling with money stolen from various fraud schemes, while leaving Amber to face his creditors alone. The evidence suggested Derek had planned his disappearance, carefully timing his departure to avoid legal consequences while maximizing the chaos left behind. Working with federal authorities, Harper arranged for Derek's arrest on identity theft and fraud charges. The FBI had been tracking Derek as part of a larger investigation into organized fraud schemes targeting vulnerable families across multiple states. My case provided crucial evidence linking Derek to similar crimes in Michigan, Ohio, and now Colorado, establishing a pattern of predatory behavior that supported federal prosecution under racketeering statutes. Derek's arrest occurred at the Bellagio Hotel, where he was gambling at high-stakes poker tables using credit cards opened in my name. Casino security footage showed him using multiple false identifications and attempting to launder stolen money through gambling transactions. The evidence was overwhelming, and Derek's previous criminal history ensured that he would face serious federal charges with potential sentences exceeding 20 years in prison. News of Derek's arrest reached my house through a phone call from the FBI agent handling the case. Agent Rebecca Martinez explained that Derek had confessed to multiple fraud schemes in an attempt to negotiate a plea agreement, but his cooperation would not undo the damage he had caused to my family. The criminal case would proceed independently of our civil litigation to reclaim my house, meaning months of additional legal proceedings, before any resolution could be achieved. Amber's reaction to Derek's arrest was complicated and emotionally devastating. She alternated between relief that his debts and creditors would no longer threaten our family and despair about raising her child alone as the wife of a convicted felon. Her due date was approaching rapidly, and the stress of Derek's criminal revelations triggered another round of premature contractions that required hospitalization. I found myself driving my pregnant sister to the emergency room while she sobbed about the collapse of her marriage and her uncertain future. The hospital stay provided an opportunity for honest conversations that had been impossible during months of legal warfare and family conflict. Amber finally admitted that Derek had been manipulating her from the beginning of their relationship, using her pregnancy to create emotional leverage against our family. He convinced her that I was selfish and would eventually abandon our parents, making it necessary for her to secure the house through legal maneuvering. His lies exploited her insecurities and our parents' favoritism to create the perfect storm that destroyed our family relationships. My parents visited Amber in the hospital and witnessed her breakdown as she confessed the full extent of Derek's manipulation and their collaboration in stealing my house. For the first time since the crisis began, they seemed to understand the magnitude of their betrayal and the criminal nature of Derek's scheme. Dad's moments of mental clarity allowed him to express genuine remorse for signing documents that transferred my property to people who never deserved it. Mom wept as she realized how Derek had exploited their love for Amber to accomplish his criminal goals. However, understanding the manipulation did not immediately repair the damaged trust between us. My parents' favoritism toward Amber had made Derek's scheme possible, and their willingness to betray me for her benefit revealed fundamental problems in our family dynamics that predated Derek's arrival. Rebuilding our relationships would require acknowledgement of their mistakes and commitment to treating their children with equal respect and consideration. The legal proceedings continued despite Derek's arrest because Amber still held partial ownership of my house through the forged documents. Harper explained that criminal prosecution of Derek would strengthen our civil case, but we still needed court orders to void the property transfer and restore my full ownership rights. The process would take additional months and thousands of dollars in legal fees, assuming Amber cooperated with returning the stolen property. As Amber's due date approached and Derek faced decades in federal prison, I found myself in an impossible position. My sister needed support during her pregnancy and delivery, but she was also an accomplice in the theft of my house who had shown no genuine remorse for her actions. My parents required care and protection, but they had betrayed me in the worst possible way and seemed to expect forgiveness without accountability. The house that was supposed to provide security for my family had become the center of criminal activity that endangered everyone I was trying to protect. The battle was far from over, but Derek's arrest marked the beginning of justice for the crimes that had torn apart my life. His creditors disappeared once news of his federal charges became public, eliminating the immediate physical danger to my family. However, the legal process of reclaiming my house and repairing my identity would continue for months, requiring continued vigilance and substantial financial resources to achieve complete victory over the criminal scheme that had exploited our family's trust and love. Derek's arrest created a power vacuum that revealed the true extent of his criminal operation and manipulation. FBI agent Martinez visited my house to collect evidence and interview family members about Derek's activities during his residence. Her investigation uncovered a sophisticated scheme that extended far beyond simple property theft into identity fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that could result in life-altering prison sentences. The search of Derek's belongings revealed disturbing evidence of premeditation and criminal planning. Hidden in his dresser drawer were copies of my birth certificate, Social Security card, bank statements, and other personal documents that my parents had innocently provided when he claimed to need information for insurance purposes. He had photographed important papers and created detailed files containing enough personal information to steal my entire identity and financial history. Agent Martinez discovered that Derek had been systematically recording conversations with my parents using hidden devices placed throughout the house. Small recording equipment was found in the living room, kitchen, and even their bedroom, documenting months of private discussions about family finances, my work schedule, and their feelings about the property arrangement. Derek had been gathering intelligence to use against my family in legal proceedings or blackmail schemes that could have continued for years. The recordings revealed Derek's manipulation tactics in shocking detail. He convinced my parents that I was planning to sell the house and abandon them to a nursing home, creating fear and insecurity that made his property theft schemes seem like protective action. He recorded their expressions of favoritism toward Amber and their complaints about my work schedule, then used these statements to justify stealing my house as compensation for their emotional neglect of their daughter. Most disturbing were recordings where Derek coached my parents on what to say to attorneys and how to explain the property transfer in ways that would strengthen Amber's legal position. He provided specific phrases and justifications designed to make the fraud appear legitimate, while ensuring that blame would fall on me if anyone questioned the suspicious circumstances. The recordings proved that Derek had orchestrated every aspect of the betrayal, from the initial manipulation to the legal documentation that stole my property. Harper's legal team used the recordings as evidence of conspiracy, elder abuse, and systematic fraud that voided any legitimate claim Amber might have had to my house. The documented manipulation proved that my parents were victims of Derek's criminal scheme rather than willing participants in betraying their son. However, their cooperation with Derek's plan, even under manipulation, created legal complications that required careful navigation to avoid criminal charges against elderly victims of fraud. The private investigators' research revealed Derek's extensive criminal history across multiple states. In Michigan, he had convinced an elderly widow to transfer her house to his girlfriend, then disappeared after securing a home equity loan for $60,000. In Ohio, he married a single mother and used her children's college savings accounts to pay gambling debts before vanishing when she discovered the theft. My family was his third known victim, but investigators suspected additional cases that had not yet been reported or discovered. Derek's pattern of behavior was remarkably consistent. He targeted vulnerable families through romantic relationships, exploited family dynamics to create division and conflict, then used legal manipulation and identity theft to steal property and assets. He specifically sought women with elderly parents or valuable family property, using pregnancy or marriage to create emotional leverage that prevented rational evaluation of his criminal behavior. The sophistication of his schemes suggested years of experience and careful planning that made prosecution under federal racketeering statutes appropriate. Amber gave birth to a healthy son during her 8th month of pregnancy, but the delivery was complicated by stress and Derek's absence. I found myself serving as her support person during labor because our parents were too emotionally overwhelmed to provide adequate assistance. Holding my nephew for the first time created conflicted emotions: joy at his arrival, mixed with anger at the circumstances that brought him into a family torn apart by his father's criminal actions. The hospital social worker interviewed Amber about her support system and financial resources for raising a child alone. Derek's criminal charges meant that he would be unable to provide support for years, and Amber had no employment history or job skills that would allow independent living with a newborn. The reality of her situation began penetrating the fantasy world Derek had created, forcing her to confront the consequences of their criminal conspiracy against her own family. During quiet moments in the hospital, Amber began revealing additional details about Derek's manipulation and their criminal activities. She admitted that Derek had convinced her to forge my signature on several documents, claiming that I had given verbal permission but was too busy with work to sign papers immediately. He provided specific instructions on copying my handwriting style and assured her that family property transfers were routine legal matters that did not require formal procedures. Amber also confessed that Derek had been selling stolen items online for months before I discovered the Facebook Marketplace listings. He told her that our grandmother had given him permission to sell family heirlooms before her death, and that I was being selfish by wanting to keep valuable items locked away instead of using them to help the family. His explanations exploited Amber's feelings of entitlement and resentment about our parents' financial struggles to justify theft of irreplaceable family treasures. The hospital stay provided an opportunity for family counseling sessions that revealed the depth of dysfunction in our relationships. Our parents' favoritism toward Amber had created resentment and inequality that Derek exploited to divide us against each other. They consistently excused her irresponsible behavior while holding me to impossibly high standards, creating conditions where criminal manipulation could flourish unchallenged. The counselor explained that Derek had simply amplified existing problems rather than creating new ones, which meant that healing our family would require addressing fundamental issues that predated his arrival. Agent Martinez returned with additional evidence gathered from Derek's Las Vegas arrest and cooperation with federal investigators. He had been working with organized crime figures who specialized in real estate fraud and identity theft schemes, targeting middle-class families. My house was intended to serve as collateral for a much larger criminal operation that involved mortgage fraud, money laundering, and potential drug distribution activities. Derek's arrest had disrupted a network of criminals who were planning to use legitimate-appearing properties for illegal enterprises. The federal investigation revealed that Derek had been married to 2 other women simultaneously while living with Amber, making their marriage invalid and voiding any legal claims she might have as his spouse. His first wife in Nevada was still legally married to him and had been cooperating with FBI investigations for over a year. Derek's bigamous relationships were part of his criminal pattern, using marriage and family connections to gain access to property and financial resources that he could exploit for personal benefit. With Derek facing federal charges that could result in 25 years in prison and evidence mounting that proved the systematic nature of his criminal scheme, the legal momentum shifted dramatically in my favor. However, Amber still held forged ownership documents, and my parents remained conflicted about supporting their son versus their pregnant daughter who needed financial assistance. The battle for my house was evolving from criminal prosecution into family reconciliation that would require forgiveness, accountability, and commitment to rebuilding trust that had been shattered by months of betrayal and manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming, but victory in court would be meaningless if it destroyed what remained of my family relationships. Derek's criminal prosecution would provide justice, but healing the wounds he created would require much more difficult conversations about favoritism, accountability, and the fundamental changes necessary to prevent future manipulation of our family dynamics. Derek's federal trial began 6 months after his arrest with media coverage that attracted regional attention due to the sophisticated nature of his criminal operation. The courtroom was packed with victims from 3 states who had suffered similar property theft and identity fraud schemes. Watching Derek enter the courthouse in shackles felt like the first step toward justice, but I knew that legal victory could not repair the emotional damage his crimes had caused to my family. The federal prosecutor presented overwhelming evidence of Derek's criminal enterprise, including the recordings he made in my house documentation of his bigamous marriages and financial records showing the systematic theft of property and identity from multiple families. Expert witnesses explained how Derek's scheme targeted vulnerable families by exploiting emotional dynamics and creating legal complications that made prosecution difficult and recovery unlikely. Derek's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a gambling addict who made poor decisions under financial pressure, but the evidence of premeditation and sophisticated planning contradicted any claim of impulsive behavior. The recordings of Derek coaching my parents on legal testimony proved that his manipulation was calculated and deliberate, designed to create maximum damage while minimizing his personal risk of prosecution. Amber was called as a witness for the prosecution, despite her complicated role as both victim and accomplice in Derek's scheme. Her testimony revealed the extent of his emotional manipulation and the lies he told to justify his criminal actions. She admitted to forging my signature under Derek's instruction and acknowledged that she knew the property transfer was illegal, but claimed she believed Derek's explanations that I had abandoned the family and deserved to lose my investment. My parents also testified about Derek's manipulation tactics and the recordings that proved his systematic exploitation of their favoritism toward Amber. Dad's dementia made his testimony difficult to follow, but Mom provided clear evidence of how Derek had exploited their fears about my intentions to justify his theft of my property. Their testimony was painful to hear because it revealed how easily Derek had manipulated their love for Amber into a weapon against their devoted son. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all federal charges, including conspiracy, identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. Derek's sentence of 22 years in federal prison felt like vindication, but also highlighted the years of legal proceedings and financial recovery that lay ahead for his victims. The judge ordered restitution payments that would be impossible for Derek to fulfill, meaning most victims would never recover their financial losses. With Derek's conviction secured, Harper filed motions to void the property transfer documents and restore full ownership of my house. Amber's cooperation with the criminal prosecution strengthened our civil case, particularly her admission that she had knowingly participated in forging legal documents. However, she requested mediation rather than litigation, hoping to avoid criminal charges for her role in the fraud, while establishing custody and support arrangements for her son. The mediation process took place in Harper's conference room with all parties represented by separate attorneys and a neutral mediator who specialized in family disputes involving criminal activity. Amber's attorney argued that she was a victim of Derek's manipulation who deserved compassion and financial support, while my attorney maintained that criminal behavior had consequences regardless of the perpetrator's personal circumstances or emotional state. During mediation, Amber made a full confession about her participation in Derek's scheme and expressed genuine remorse for the damage caused to our family. She acknowledged that favoritism and entitlement had made her vulnerable to Derek's manipulation, but also accepted responsibility for choosing to participate in criminal activity rather than questioning his explanations or seeking legal advice. Her willingness to accept accountability created an opening for potential reconciliation that had seemed impossible during the height of our conflict. The settlement agreement restored full ownership of my house, while establishing a trust fund for Amber's son that would provide educational support without enabling his mother's irresponsible financial behavior. Amber agreed to perform 200 hours of community service at programs serving victims of domestic violence and financial abuse, helping other women recognize manipulation tactics and avoid similar exploitation. She also committed to completing financial literacy courses and job training programs that would allow her to support her child independently. My parents entered into a formal agreement that allowed them to continue living in my house under clearly defined terms that protected both their security and my property rights. They would pay nominal rent that covered their food and utilities while I maintained responsibility for major expenses and property maintenance. Most importantly, they agreed to participate in family counseling that would address the favoritism and enabling behaviors that made Derek's manipulation possible. The restoration of my house ownership felt anticlimactic after months of legal warfare and family conflict. Walking through rooms where Derek had lived and planned his criminal activities created mixed emotions of victory and violation that would require time and effort to overcome. Professional contractors would repair the physical damage Derek had caused, but healing the emotional wounds would take much longer and require ongoing commitment from everyone involved. Mrs. Patterson organized a neighborhood celebration when the legal proceedings concluded, bringing together community members who had supported my family during our crisis. Her friendship and vigilance had been crucial to our safety and legal success, proving that good neighbors can make the difference between isolation and support during life's most difficult challenges. The celebration felt like a symbolic reclaiming of my house and my place in the community that Derek had tried to steal, along with my property. Agent Martinez provided updates on the ongoing federal investigation that had expanded to include Derek's criminal associates and the organized crime network that facilitated his schemes. Several additional arrests were made based on evidence gathered from Derek's cooperation and plea agreement, disrupting criminal operations that had victimized dozens of families across multiple states. My case had become the catalyst for a much larger prosecution that would prevent future victims from experiencing similar devastation. The financial recovery process began with insurance claims for stolen property and identity theft damages, but most losses would never be fully compensated. My grandmother's jewelry and dad's watch collection were gone forever, along with years of credit history that would require careful monitoring to rebuild. The emotional cost of Derek's crimes exceeded any financial calculation, creating scars that would influence family relationships for years to come. Amber's son began showing signs of developmental delays that might have been caused by stress during pregnancy, creating additional medical expenses and long-term care needs that complicated our family's financial planning. Despite everything that had happened, I could not abandon my nephew to suffer consequences for his parents' criminal behavior. The trust fund established through our settlement would provide for his special needs while protecting him from future exploitation or manipulation. The legal victory felt hollow because it could not restore the innocence and trust that Derek had stolen from our family. We had reclaimed my house and secured criminal justice, but the process had revealed fundamental problems in our relationships that required ongoing attention and commitment to address. Derek's conviction was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of much harder work to rebuild our family on foundations of mutual respect and accountability rather than favoritism and enabling. 2 years after Derek's sentencing, my house had been transformed from a crime scene into a genuine home where healing and growth could flourish. Professional contractors had repaired all the physical damage Derek caused, but more importantly, my family had begun rebuilding relationships based on honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. The legal victory had provided justice, but the real triumph was learning to forgive while maintaining healthy boundaries that protected everyone's well-being. My parents thrived in their ground-floor master bedroom under our new living arrangement that balanced their need for security with my right to control my own property. Dad's dementia progressed slowly with proper medication and regular medical care, while Mom's anxiety improved dramatically once the legal stress ended and family relationships stabilized. They paid modest rent that covered their personal expenses, while I maintained the house and property, creating a sustainable arrangement that benefited everyone involved. The family counseling sessions had revealed how decades of favoritism toward Amber created resentment and dysfunction that Derek exploited to destroy our unity. Mom admitted that she had always worried about Amber's irresponsible behavior and tried to compensate by providing extra support that enabled her poor choices. Dad acknowledged that his pride in my success had led him to take my sacrifices for granted, while excusing Amber's failures as temporary setbacks that required family assistance rather than personal accountability. Amber completed her community service at a women's shelter where she learned to recognize manipulation tactics and help other victims avoid financial exploitation. The experience opened her eyes to the reality of Derek's criminal behavior and the damage that entitled thinking had caused to her own judgment. She enrolled in nursing school with support from the educational trust established for her son, demonstrating genuine commitment to building a stable, independent life. Her son, little Michael, showed remarkable resilience despite his early developmental challenges. The trust fund provided for specialized therapy and educational support that helped him overcome speech delays and behavioral issues that might have been caused by prenatal stress. Amber's transformation into a responsible mother and student created opportunities for supervised visits and gradually rebuilding our sibling relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. The most unexpected development was my relationship with Jennifer Walsh, the family therapist who had guided our counseling sessions. Our professional relationship evolved into friendship and eventually romance as she helped me process the trauma of Derek's betrayal and learn to trust again. Jennifer understood the complexity of family dynamics and supported my commitment to helping my relatives while protecting my own emotional well-being. Jennifer and I married in a small ceremony held in my backyard with Mrs. Patterson serving as an honorary grandmother and my parents participating despite their complicated feelings about the relationship. The wedding felt like a celebration of survival and growth rather than just romantic love, marking the successful transition from victim of criminal manipulation to someone who could build healthy relationships based on equality and mutual support. Mrs. Patterson had become an integral part of our extended family, often joining us for dinner and providing the wisdom of someone who had navigated 8 decades of life's challenges with grace and humor. Her vigilance during Derek's criminal activities had been crucial to our safety, and her continued friendship enriched our lives immeasurably. We established a regular schedule of assistance with her house and yard work, creating a reciprocal relationship that benefited everyone involved. The federal investigation that began with Derek's prosecution resulted in the conviction of 12 additional criminals involved in real estate fraud schemes targeting vulnerable families. Agent Martinez estimated that the network had stolen more than $3 million in property and assets before their arrests, making my case a crucial element in protecting future victims from similar exploitation. The knowledge that our suffering had prevented other families from experiencing Derek's crimes provided meaningful purpose to our ordeal. My career flourished as I channeled the analytical skills developed during legal proceedings into innovative software development projects that earned recognition and promotion within my company. The discipline and attention to detail required to fight Derek's manipulation had strengthened my professional abilities and leadership skills. I was offered the opportunity to relocate to Seattle for a senior position, but chose to remain in Colorado where my family needed ongoing support and my life had finally achieved stability. The house that had been the center of so much conflict became a symbol of redemption and family healing. The rooms where Derek plotted criminal activities were transformed into spaces for celebration and connection. The master bedroom provided comfort for my aging parents, while the nursery occasionally hosted Michael during Amber's supervised visits. The basement where Derek entertained his criminal associates became Jennifer's home office, where she conducted therapy sessions for other families recovering from manipulation and abuse. Financial recovery took longer than legal vindication, but insurance settlements and restitution payments eventually compensated most of our monetary losses. My credit rating was restored through careful monitoring and dispute procedures that removed fraudulent accounts Derek had opened. The emotional recovery was more complex and ongoing, requiring continued vigilance against the tendency to trust too easily or sacrifice too much in the name of family loyalty. Derek remained in federal prison, serving his 22-year sentence with no possibility of early release due to the severity of his crimes and his extensive criminal history. Amber received occasional letters from him attempting to manipulate her feelings and maintain control over her life, but she had learned to recognize his tactics and refused all contact. The knowledge that he could not harm our family provided peace of mind that allowed genuine healing to continue. The experience taught me that genuine love requires accountability and boundaries rather than blind sacrifice and enabling. My devotion to my parents had made me vulnerable to Derek's manipulation because I prioritized their happiness over my own well-being. Learning to balance care for family members with protection of personal interests created healthier relationships that could withstand future challenges without creating opportunities for exploitation. The transformation of my family dynamics from dysfunction to health required ongoing effort and commitment from everyone involved. Monthly counseling sessions helped us recognize warning signs of manipulation and maintain communication patterns that prevented misunderstandings from escalating into serious conflicts. The investment in professional guidance was expensive, but invaluable for creating sustainable changes that would protect us from future predators. As I sat on my front porch watching Jennifer play with Michael in the yard where Derek's creditors had once threatened my parents, I reflected on the journey from betrayal to redemption that had defined the past 3 years of my life. The house I bought to provide security for my family had become the foundation for relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. Derek's criminal scheme had nearly destroyed us, but surviving his manipulation had ultimately made our family stronger and more resilient. The legal victory had been important, but the real triumph was learning to forgive while maintaining healthy boundaries to love without enabling destructive behavior and to trust again while recognizing warning signs of manipulation. Derek had stolen my house temporarily, but he had inadvertently given me something more valuable, the knowledge that genuine family relationships require equality, accountability, and mutual respect to flourish and endure. The morning sun illuminated my reclaimed property and the family that had learned to appreciate what we had rather than taking sacrifices for granted. The house that had been a symbol of betrayal and criminal exploitation was now a testament to the power of justice, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption, even after devastating betrayal. Derek's crimes had tested our family's bonds, but surviving his manipulation had created relationships stronger than any that had existed before his arrival. What started as a story of devastating betrayal had become a testament to the resilience of family bonds when they're built on foundations of mutual respect rather than guilt and obligation. The house that Derek tried to steal had become a home where healing was possible, where mistakes could be forgiven without being forgotten, and where love could flourish within healthy boundaries that protected everyone's well-being and dignity. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to fight back and rebuild your life after such devastating manipulation? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Please take a moment to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming life's greatest challenges, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that justice and healing are possible even after the worst betrayals. Thank you for joining me on this journey from victimhood to victory, and I wish you strength and wisdom in all your family relationships.